Good morning. We're going to start part 7, page 68. Okay, and this we haven't read yet. I'm reading it together with you now, and we will be tested on this eventually. I don't know when. Okay, part 7, line 405. He left the general's presence and then went home. Okay, so we finished in the last recording where Sadao met with the general, and he was very, very upset that his wife was was all upset, and that the prisoner had disrupted their house so much, and because of the prisoner the servants left and his wife had to do all the work and she was worried all the time. So he went to the general's house, and because the general was sick, and he told the general about his problems, and the general suggested that he would send assassins one night, that Sadao wouldn't know which night it was, and the assassins would come in and they would kill him and they would take care of the body, and then it wouldn't be Sadao's problem anymore. And even though we already know that Sadao is able, he really sees the American like a human being. But so he feels he can't do anything, he can't hand him over. But if somebody else is taking care of it, so it's one step removed, and he's willing to agree to it. So he left the general's presence and then went home, thinking over the plan. In this way, the whole thing would be taken out of his hands. He would tell Hannah nothing, since she would be timid at the idea of assassins in the house, and yet certainly such persons were essential in an absolute state such as Japan was. How else could rulers deal with those who opposed them? Okay, so here Sadao is convincing himself that his plan is a good idea, and also the fact that a general would have his own personal assassins is something that is justified, that makes sense, even though I think because he's convincing himself of that, we realize that deep down maybe he realizes that it is a problem. Line 409. He refused to allow anything but reason to be the atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. But as he opened the door, to his surprise, he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. Okay, so because he made this decision to allow the assassins to come, he doesn't want anything but reason, anything but like clear thinking, that practical thinking, no emotions to go into him when he goes to see the American, because he doesn't want to regret his decision. He doesn't want to think that it was a mistake. So he goes in and he sees the American out of bed and about to go outside into the garden. "What is this?" he exclaimed. "Who gave you permission to leave your room?" "I'm not used to waiting for permission," Tom said gaily. "Gosh, I feel pretty good again. But will the muscles on this side always feel stiff?" So he's all happy and feeling good, and then he asks Sadao a medical question about the muscles on one side of his stomach or body feeling like stiff, a little hard to move, a little bit not like they felt before. And Sadao gets involved in the medical side of things. So line 415. "Is it so?" Sadao inquired, surprised. He forgot all else. "Now I thought I had provided against that," he murmured. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt and gazed at the healing scar. "Massage may do it," he said, "if exercise does not." "It won't bother me much," the young man said. His young face was gaunt under the stubbly beard. "Say, doctor, I've got something I want to say to you. If I hadn't met If I hadn't met a Jap like you, well, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that." Okay, this is a very important line. You might want to highlight it in your book if you can do that soon. Um, if I hadn't met a Jap like you, well, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that. Meaning, if I hadn't met a Japanese person that was able to see me as a human being and not only as an enemy, was able to see past the fact that you're Japanese and I'm American, then I know that I wouldn't be alive, that you would have killed me or handed me, that that person would have killed me, handed me over. Okay, so I realize I'm very thankful to you. Sh- Sadao bowed but could not speak. Sure, I know that, Tom went on warmly. His big thin hands gripping a chair were white at the knuckles. I guess if all the Japs were like you, there wouldn't have been a war. If all the Japanese people were like you, were able to see past stereotypes, are able to see past the fact that they think that that I'm American and Americans are bad, and be able to realize that deep down we're all human beings, then there wouldn't have been a war. Then maybe we wouldn't have had to get into a war. We could have worked things out. Perhaps, Sadao said with difficulty. And now I think you had better get back to bed. He helped the boy back into bed and then bowed. Good night, he said. Okay, so this is very difficult for Sadao because the Tom is connecting to him on a human level. He's saying to him, "I realize that you're different than other people. That you're able to see past all what country we're from, and be able to see me like I'm flesh and blood, like I'm a human being, like I'm like you." And Sadao just agreed to let assassins come and kill him. So it's very hard for him, and he wants to just get away from him and get him out of the room. Line 426. Sadao slept badly that night. Time and time again he woke, thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps, the sound of a twig broken, or a stone displaced in the garden, a noise such as men might make who carried a burden. Okay, so he kept waking up thinking that he heard the assassins moving, carrying Tom out of the house, and he kept waking up from it, and he didn't sleep well. The next morning, he made the excuse to go first into the guest room. If the American were gone, he then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once that it was not last night. There on the pillow was the shaggy blond head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep, and he closed the door again quietly. He is asleep, he told Hannah. He is almost well to sleep like that. What shall we do with him? Hannah whispered her old refrain. Sadao shook his head. I must decide in a day or two, he promised. Okay, so he said he'll decide in a day or two because he was hoping that within a day or two the assassins would come and then it wouldn't be his problem anymore. It'd be the general who decided it. But certainly, he thought, the second night must be the night. There rose a wind that night, and he listened to the sounds of bending boughs and whistling partitions. Hannah woke too. Ought we not go and close the sick man's partition? She asked. No, Sadao said. He is able to do it for himself. But the next morning, the American was still there. Then the third night, of course, must be the night. The wind changed to quiet rain, and the garden was full of the sound of dripping leaves and running springs. Sadao slept a little better, but he woke at the sound of a crash and leaped to his feet. What was that? Hannah cried. The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. I must go and see. But he held her and would not let her move. Sadao, she cried, what is the matter with you? Don't go, he muttered. Don't go. His terror infected her, and she stood breathless, waiting. There was only silence. Together they crept back into the bed, the baby between them. Yet when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, there was the young man. He was very gay, which means happy, and he had already washed and was now on his feet. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself, and today there was a faint color in his cheeks. I am well, he said joyously. So already 3 nights have passed, and the assassins didn't come. And Sadao is not sleeping. He's worried about it. Let's see what he's going to do. Part 8. Okay, we're on page 70. Sadao drew his kimono round his weary body. He could not, he decided suddenly, go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's life. No, simply it was not worth the strain. So again here, Sadao is trying to convince himself that the reason why he's having such a hard time with this and the reason why he's not sleeping at night and why it's so hard for him is because it's too much of a bother, of a pain, of a nuisance having the young man around and worrying when the assassins are coming. It's not that he really cares if something's going to happen to the young man, but let's see if maybe he's just trying to convince himself of that, but really he does care. So let's see. Line 456. You are well, Sadao agreed. He lowered his voice. You are so well that I think if I put my boat on the shore tonight with food and extra clothing in it, you might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. It is so near the coast that it has not been worth fortifying. Nobody lives on it because in storm it is submerged. But this is not the season of storm. You could live there until you saw a Korean fishing boat pass by. They pass quite near the island because the water is many fathoms deep there. So Sadao now is telling the American about an escape plan. And he says, yes, you are better. You are well. You are healthy. And I think that you're so healthy that if I left my boat next to the shore with food and clothing in it, that you would be able to take it to the little island not far from here, that nobody that isn't protected, that the army doesn't check it out because it's so close to the coast, so nobody's worried about it and nobody lives on it because in the winter, in the storm season, it goes under the water. But now it's not the storm season, so you could live there until you saw a Korean fishing boat pass by. And Korea is not a part of the war, so they're not at war with America or with Japan. So if a Korean boat picked him up, then he can end up getting to safety. Koreans are not at war with the Americans now. And then the young man stared at him. Line 461. The young man stared at him, slowly comprehending. Do I have to? He asked. Do I have to go? Am I in danger here? If I don't go, something might happen to me? I think so, Sadao said gently. You understand. It is not hidden that you are here. I think you are in danger. People know that you're here, and something could happen to you if you stay. The young man nodded in perfect comprehension. Okay, he said simply. Sadao did not see him again until evening. As soon as it was dark, he had dragged the stout boat down to the shore, and in it put food and bottled water that he had bought secretly during the day, as well as 2 quilts he had bought at a pawnshop. The boat he tied to a post in the water, for the tide was high. There was no moon, and he worked without a flashlight. When he came to the house, he entered as though he were just back from his work, and so Hannah knew nothing. Yumi was here today, she said as she served his supper. Though she was so modern, still she did not eat with him. Yumi cried over the baby, she went on with a sigh. She misses him so. The servants will come back as soon as the foreigner is gone, Sadao said. He went into the guest room that night before he went to bed, and himself checked carefully the American's temperature, the state of the wound, and his heart and pulse. The pulse was irregular, but that was perhaps because of excitement. The young man's pale lips were pressed together and his eyes burned. Only the scars on his neck were red.